This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is the October 20th, 2017 edition, show 278. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatal, back with you from the Brooklyn bunker, almost fully recovered from my trip to Lexington last weekend. Not quite, like 85% recovered. Joining me on the phone, calling in from the planet Texas. You know him, you love him, you really love his soon-to-be new facial hairstyle. He is, of course, the people's champ, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
Oh, I forgot about that. I forgot we were doing that today. I forgot we were doing that today. Oh, man.
For the Friday listeners who don't know, we had the Fu Manchu bet last weekend, head-to-head in the QE2, Proctor's Ledge versus Uni. Unfortunately, neither one ran very well, taking some of the enjoyment out of the bet. But I did technically win when Uni crossed the line first, and therefore JK needs to shave into a Fu Manchu. Problem is, despite his claims that he had like significant stubble, when JK walked in the green room on Friday, I let out a torrent of expletives because, he made Don Johnson, Miami Vice era look like Dallas Keuchel. Or he had nothing up on the face there. And so we decided he'd have to grow it out for a week. But it's been about a week. How are things looking on that face? Have you taken the before picture for the before and after yet?
Yeah, I think we're ready. I think we're ready. I think it's something that's going to have to happen sooner than later.
All right, we are going to do something a little different. We're going to do just our first impressions of the 13 Breeders' Cup races. Neither one of us has had a chance to look at this weekend's racing yet. Hopefully that's not too disappointing for those of you expecting some tips for the weekend. Though I imagine, JK, you will be doing some tipping or have already done some tipping for the DRF pregame show for the weekend out of the gate. Is that right?
Yeah, it was a struggle. I'm not going to lie to you. It was a struggle to kind of figure something out. And so when in doubt, when you're looking for a good wager, you always look to one of those players, pick fives. And so I threw out kind of not a spready, but not the full A and B ticket maker version of a pick five at Belmont tomorrow in the first through fifth. So had a horse in there that I was kind of interested in betting. And so I put a pick five together, and that's what we talked about for the weekend. I skipped. I was going to do some stakes, but none of them kind of got my blood flowing, and it's kind of hard to get excited about the Raven Run when the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare sprints around the corner.
I haven't even looked. Does it just become a very diluted field? Is that the issue?
Oh, it's not an embarrassing field. It's like a cool field, and it'll be a good race to watch and wager on, but it just wasn't anything that kind of got me going. No bet back situations in there. No horses that I've been waiting for to try something or to do something different or anything of that nature. So it wasn't really a phenomenal opportunity by any means.
Let me ask, when you're talking about getting excited about races, how much does that typically have to do with what you just said, a horse to watch, for example? If you use DRF Stable Mail and get your notice that a certain horse is in, how often is that the impetus to get excited about betting a race versus just like cracking the PPs and going through and finding an angle on the paper?
Well, I think like a lot of people in this sport, you're drawn to it for one of two reasons. One, because of the fan aspect of it. The fandom, you kind of fall in love with the equine and human stars of the game. Now, the other part of it is the wagering part of it. I happen to be in love with both of those things. And so when my favorite opportunities are when those two things combine, when you get a situation, and obviously I can try to find a situation that I wasn't successful in and not just talk about this one, but the practical joke situation in the Allen H. Jerkins. It's one of my favorite races. It's fun seeing all those 3-year-olds we've been following through the Derby trail who maybe were trying to do something they shouldn't have been doing, are now cutting back to a distance in a grade one on a big day, and probably what is the biggest 3-year-old one-turn race of the year. And then it's a horse that I've been kind of noting, wanting to bet and having that wagering opportunity. Those are my favorite times. Those are the times I get the most excited about. But I can get excited about a situation that just contains one of those aspects of love of the game.
I agree with what you're saying. The best situations are when it's a horse to watch that you don't need the DRF stable mail to tell you that the horse is in, because you just remember everything about the horse, and you relate to races on those big days, almost like you do a sports team that you like. It's interesting. Different players have different ideas about that. There are professional players. Maloney comes to mind. Brent Sumja, another name that comes to mind like this. Like the big days, it's like they can kind of take them or leave them. They're more about the bread and butter, but something that unites us, JK, and I think it's because we're more, certainly more than those guys at the, like, aficionados and fans / better or better / fans. There's something real special about those big days, especially in the modern game.
The thing about Brent Sumja is, because of his training background, the frustration that sometimes it can be deciphering trainer intent and conditions, he is extremely, extremely proficient in. And so, like, that's why he likes claiming races, is because he can see through a lot of the things that some of us can't see through. And that's why he does so well in those scenarios. He's a guy that, you're right, he said it a million times, he'd much rather bet on a non-winners of two $10,000 claimer than bet on the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
Speaking of Maloney, I'm going to try to rope him and you into another online handicapping session, essentially a webinar version of the podcast. I'm thinking maybe we'll look at those guaranteed bets on Saturday, something we can maybe try to squeeze in Friday morning on West Coast time. If I can get you and Mike to commit to it, we're doing the production meeting in the middle of the show. I'll email you.
I see what you did there. I see what you did there. It's like you asked me in front of people so that I can't say no.
Hey man, whatever works. I just want to make the best, create the best content possible for DRF.com. A few other things before we dive into these races. One is this little matter that we talked about to our Tuesday fans. We should reiterate for the Friday fans. There's been a shift on iTunes. We used to have our own DRF Players podcast channel. Now we're on a bigger DRF channel that also includes the feeds for the great Matt Bernier show and also for Out of the Gate. But if you were one of those kind people who left us a review on the old iTunes site, that's gone now. We want to get those reviews back up on our new page. It'll help people find the show. And we even offered a little contest, JK. Tell the people about that and let me know. I haven't looked yet if anybody's already submitted a few reviews for us.
Yeah, no, we looked. We definitely don't want to encourage you to not be honest. If you hate the show, then feel free to comment that you hate it. But I would imagine you wouldn't be listening if you hated it. So I'm hoping that if you like the show, you'll post a comment and just kind of let people know in your words what the show's about. Maybe some of the things you like about the show. And like I said, feel free to throw in some constructive criticism. I mean, I'd rather you just email us that, but if you want to put it on the thing, put it on the thing. And whoever, we're just going to pick a random person to get a copy of Pete and Mike's new book that'll be coming out, I believe, in November. Betting with an Edge, is that what we're calling it?
That's what we're calling it.
Betting with an Edge. And I say we, like, I'm taking ownership because I know both of them, and the book's going to be phenomenal. So
You're
I'm
in
just
there.
Like tying.
Did you know that? You're in there twice.
Yeah. Yes, I know I'm in there twice because when you sent me a copy to like kind of look at, I command F to see where my name showed up because you told me it was in there. Those are the first two parts I read.
Oh my goodness! I tried to convince Mike to delete you from there, but he wouldn't listen.
Yeah, so it's phenomenal. We talked about it last week, and I won't go on a rampage about it again. But it's going to be a phenomenal book. I think it'll be right up there with Buyer on Speed and Davidowitz and Exotic Wager or Exotic betting. Excuse me. So
very kind words.
Next level stuff.
And if the book lives up to them, that credit all goes to Mike and nothing to do with me. But I did effectively turn on the tape recorder and capture a lot of what he had to say. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be talking about that. You'll be talking about that till we're blue in the face. So we don't need to give people too much of that now. But do go to iTunes, search for DRF Players Podcast, leave us a review. We appreciate it very much. What else? Oh, I have a note here, Jonathan. I don't even know what it means, but I like the looks of it. It just says Game of Thrones.
It's just funny. It reminded me of the situation. Obviously, we talked about how I started watching Game of Thrones and how I got caught up in an unbelievable amount of time. But it reminded me a little bit of a conversation I had that had to do with racing. I've obviously tried to turn other people that have, for whatever reason, not got started on Game of Thrones. I've tried to turn them on to that. And it reminds me a lot about racing. What happened, the conversation I had is in this game, like when you first start and you see someone who takes a bad beat or, they're alive in a pick five and a 20-1 shot wins, you look at them and you're like, hey, just so you know, like that's going to happen. Like, so if you can't handle that mentally, you probably should find a different game to participate in. And that happened to me recently. Was turning someone on a Game of Thrones, and I think it's no secret in the first episode, someone gets their head cut off. And I look over and there's a kind of a look of like, what am I getting myself into? And I paused it and I was like, look, if you have a problem with that head getting cut off, it's going to happen at least once an episode for the next 7 seasons. So you might as well find a different show to watch. Maybe we could switch over to Chicago PD or Grey's Anatomy or something. But it ain't going to get much better than that. So it's all about knowing what you're getting yourself into from the start.
That's brilliant. The 25-1 shot getting beat in nose, that is sort of the horse player everyday equivalent of a beheading. So there you go. When you talked about bad beats, it made me think about our friend Pipes, who I was so looking forward to hanging out with at Keeneland. He's always so good at mocking me for mispronouncing race names like the Sycamore and the Alcibiades, and I swear it was almost like a supernatural visit. Like he was there for a second and then gone, and that also made me think of our friend Jake Ballas. His nicknames are going to have to be revised, JK. Prince of Keeneland, more like Ghost of Keeneland. I've been there twice in a row. He's been nowhere to be found, and I'm beginning to take it personally.
Yeah, Jake was being the Prince of Houston. He had to go watch his Astros play the Yankees, so he was out of town for the weekend. But the Piper, he had a bad beat or two, and he usually has to take long walks when those happen. So he was missing as well. But he still is without a doubt the best impersonator of Pete Fornatale that there is.
He might be the only, but he is very good. I always enjoy. There's nothing quite as much fun as getting mocked by Pipes. When he gets back in form, we'll have to have him on here to bust out that impression. As for Jake being in Houston, I don't know, that bullpen could use a couple extra arms. If he's a pretty athletic guy, if he can get his various physical ailments sorted out, there may be a role for him in the 7th inning tonight.
Yeah, he's not physically athletic now. I can tell you that. A quick story about Jake for those who don't know. You talk about having a bad run. If you know Jake or you've seen Jake, he's been booting around. He was playing with his dog up in Saratoga and like bruised his foot. Essentially got turf toe, like running around in a park. So he was a guy in a boot the entire meet for Saratoga.
Not a good place to be on one wheel, by the way.
No, he finally starts to get better. He comes back down here comes back to Lexington. Then his knee starts hurting from wearing the boot. He takes the boot off. The foot then goes backwards. He decides, I'm going to go see my orthopedic back in Houston. He goes back and he parlays it with going to the game. He is in the orthopedic to get x-rays on his foot. He's rolling his pant leg up to give full access to his situation. And he snaps a tendon in his finger. So they have to wave over the hand specialist from 2 doors down to come over and do an X-ray on his hand to determine that he ripped a tendon in his middle finger. So he's broken on both ends.
Man is a mess. The man is a mess. All right, let's dive into these races. We got 13 races to talk about here. Obviously, there's a limit to what we could do, especially in some of them. For example, the first one we're going to talk about, which will be happening on Friday, part of this late guaranteed pick 4, the 2-year-old Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. Of course, it's a Grade 1. What are your early thoughts heading into this race? Very, very hard to evaluate before we know who's coming over from the English and Irish contingent. And if you're a Timeform US person, you can actually go and take a look, get started on your work with these advanced PPs. And it's almost too many names to start watching tape and taking notes for the Europeans, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole point of what we're going to do today is just that, we kind of modeled it on 2 guys sitting around excited about the Breeders' Cup, and you just start tossing ideas back and forth. There'll be plenty of time for handicapping and going in depth. One of my favorite features on Timeform is the ability to kind of hit that preview arrow, to the left next to the names. There's a little blue arrow that sticks out. You can click that, and you can compare kind of that spotlight figure, which is kind of like a figure that is kind of an indicator of what you could maybe expect today from this one. And the horse that popped out when I first did that, which I thought was interesting, was Wesley Ward's horse, Himp Himp Hooray, who got a 107 Timeform figure going 5.5 at Monmouth, then shows up at Woodbine in the summer and hangs on beating the neck with a nice little figure as well. So that's a horse that could be a little bit interesting on those tighter turns, on that harder surface, as one that could be involved and prominent early, that could be interesting and holding on for a piece. We've talked about it before. I'm really interested in voting control coming out of that Pilgrim. Obviously, the start wasn't ideal there. It's Chad. It's probably going to be overbet a little bit. But if we can get some Euros with some form to come over, you would think that maybe voting control could be a little bit of a price. Unfortunately, I have to use Shoke. If he wasn't a Donegal horse, then I would probably try to fade him off of that perfect trip last time with voting control running at him. So those are my first kind of initial thoughts about the race. But like you said, this is one of those situations where what our friends across the pond bring over is what's going to make the difference on where you go in here.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't even considered the Ward horse. Definitely wanted to take a look at should he make the field. And yeah, I'm not even going to bother getting into the potential Europeans yet because there's just so much that can happen between now and then. But obviously,
do we know who they might be? Do we have which one of them's taking the most money on Odds Checker?
Let's take a quick look on Odds Checker, and we can see if we can figure out some clues. But they don't. It's so early that
the tricky thing about that too, Pete, is I've noticed is a lot of times the horses that are coming over from Europe are like one-turn horses that are like stretching out, and it's always a really weird deal because
often horses who've never run around any turn.
Exactly. You're trying to project whether or not a European-bred horse is going to stretch from 6 to a mile, and our inclination is that of course they are. Yeah, of course they are. It's a European horse. They're going to stretch. They're going to stretch, and sometimes that can be a little tricky.
This is interesting. U.S. Navy flag, I think he's the one who won the Dewhurst last weekend, is taking some real money here at 3-1 on Odds Checker. Now, I don't know if that's just on one site or if he's priced up everywhere, but that would be as good form from Europe to ever come to this race if I'm thinking of the right horse. U.S. Navy flag not even listed in the Timeform PPs right now. That's what I'm talking about. It's so complicated, but it is interesting. And why don't we can segue directly maybe to our discussion of the Juvenile Filly Turf, which is that a Friday race as well? Yes. So we'll skip around a little on Friday. This will actually be the third Breeders' Cup race on Friday. But if Clemmy were to come over, this would be the first time that a Guinea's favorite were to ever run in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Filly Turf. She would have much better form than what we're used to seeing. A few interesting reasons why they might be doing this. They have Churchill, of course. Churchill is Clemmy's older brother, and he's a horse that is going to have a stallion career. And who knows, maybe are they thinking possibly about a stallion career for Churchill in the U.S. and is having Clemmy run maybe an extra way of marketing him because they're so convinced she's going to do well. Some interesting possibilities as to why maybe they will actually send Clemmy. I mean, if she comes, I certainly won't be betting against her. She'll be head and shoulders over the rest of the European contingent, and it might just be a question of Clemmy and the Chad Browns that you use in your multi-race wagers. What was your view in the Juvenile Filly Turf?
Yeah, we've talked about it. There's the two Chads that I'm obviously excited about an opportunity to bet, but I do a podcast with a guy who's extremely excited about the idea of Clemmy coming over. So I respect that. I respect that opinion. I do remember her. I remember her from watching Ascot and
Sure.
and kind of the conversations that were had about her. So yeah, I think she's definitely one. If she shows up, that you have to consider. But I fell in love with the way that Rushing Fall in Significant Form ran, and like you mentioned, they've done it in American style racing with a trainer who does well over here. We talked about Matt Bernier texting last week about how Aiden O'Brien has struggled as of late in the U.S. I think maybe 1 for 26ish, something of that nature. So I think there's an interesting strategy here. If Clemmy comes over and it ends up being like a big favorite.
Which I think she would be. I mean, she's going to be, if she comes, she's going to be 8-5 or shorter. I mean, a European gut would probably be like, oh gosh, if she comes, she'd be 1-2. But I mean, I don't think she'd go that short just because of all the attended questions and USA biases and whatnot. But bookies are going to price her up short if she makes the gate. Interestingly, 4-1 now on Odds Checker, suggesting that there's still some real doubt in a lot of people's minds over there if she's even going to come. But anyway, continue.
So I think just like a 2-week out idea, what I would do in a multi-race situation here is I think you have to pick one of the two. You use Clemmy as a single A horse and then use the 2 Chads as a B, at least for me, the 2 Chads as a B, or you do it the other way where you use the 2 Chads as A horses and then you use Clemmy as a B. Obviously the workout report information is going to be important moving forward. I would imagine that Chad would have sent Rushing Fall back up to Belmont, and a lot of times he pairs his horses together, so he'll work them together. There's a chance that we could see a Rushing Fall Significant Form work together on the grass, which is something that I think would be an indicator of which one could be doing a little bit better. Look, I like both of those horses. At one point, I was fine with using just one of them as my kind of Breeders' Cup juvenile filly horses. And I think that being able to have 2 of them would be nice as well.
As of right now, Rushing Fall 8-1 on Odds Checker, Significant Form 11-1. So some interesting possibilities. Obviously, I'll just throw this idea out. It's too early to really talk about this, but in terms of backups, this could be a spot where the other European angle comes into play. Is that something you've ever messed around with? It sure does seem to be effective sometimes in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, no, I feel like the other European for me has won a couple of times. The gray horse for Godolphin that won at Santa Anita. Do you remember who I'm talking about?
No, brain fried.
Mike Smith rode the horse. I'll figure it out. Anyways, that was I'll say it even before we get to the next race, but that was a horse that was kind of a secondary one for me. Hit It a Bomb was not a secondary one for me. That was one that I wanted. So I definitely think there's something to that because a lot of times their secondary horses are better than our good ones. And there's all those questions. When it comes to the Europeans, there's the questions that we'll never be able to know until they run. Do they like the ground? And will they enjoy Lasix? And will it move them up? Those are 2 things that you don't know until they run.
That's a point we can touch back on when we get to the filly and mare turf. Obviously, we'll dive back into these races in much more detail and authority later. One quick general handicapping point, Jonathan, I just want to talk about replays and how I'll speak for both of us while you look up the name of that Godolphin.
Outstrip, and I remember because he beat my horse. He beat Bobby's Kitten.
Right. In the juvenile, Bobby's Kitten ran off. Yeah. Several years back. Good find on that. Just going to talk about the importance of workouts and how there are various sources where you can get video and analysis of these workouts. Of course, DRF.com, fantastic place to base all of your Breeders' Cup study, especially between the DRF Formulator PPs and the Timeform PPs and all the great advanced content that's going to be coming out, especially after pre-entries. But they're, without plugging specific competitors too hard, not very hard these days, JK, to find video of all this stuff, is it?
No, absolutely. And I think that, like you said, I would imagine that this weekend's the weekend that it'll start to pick up in terms of having, Mike Welch and the team out there that are doing their daily videos where, Welch will talk about the races, and he'll probably keep doing the cameo thing that he was doing for Breeders' Cup, which was hilarious with the photo bombing of the trainers in the background. So I would think that those videos will begin. One of the things I think is really cool is with the internet nowadays, those works that the people at DRF are talking about or whatever you're reading or hearing that Arrogant worked well, and this is why it happened, you can find those works online and you can watch them and kind of develop your workout eye. And so, I would encourage you to do that.
That's a great point.
Just to kind of stay in touch with what's going on.
It can help you today, the specifics of the information. It can maybe help you tomorrow. Not everybody's going to have that skill, but it's not a bad idea to try to develop it at least and see if when you're watching workouts and listening to somebody like Mike Welch talk about what he's seeing, that might just make a light bulb go off for a lot of people. It's one of those things where it can be an important part of a horse player's arsenal if you have that club in your bag. If you don't, no worries. Listen to the likes of Mike and take your cues from him. But it's actually also just a fun and rewarding part of being a horse player, in my opinion, the ability to be able to go out in the morning yourself and see some stuff and piece together some winners that way, or watching sales videos. It's an underappreciated area of the game, and what a better way, to have Mike Welch and Mike Vesci essentially as your personal teachers, being able to read what they're saying and then watch that on the video. Why not? I think it's a great idea. Let's talk about the dirt mile for very briefly. Looks like More Spirit is going to be a big favorite in here. We've talked in the past, JK, about how despite your silver wig and love of Bob Baffert, you're a little skeptical about this one just because of the time between races. Where is your head going in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile as of now?
Well, a couple of things. Speaking of workouts, there's a workout with More Spirit with Dre Fong, and someone said, I believe it was our own Marcus Hirsch tweeted, does More Spirit always work that bad? And then I believe Twitter personality, or I don't know what his exact situation, I think he's on another radio show, but Jude Feld said he's working with the breeders, with the best sprinter in the world, and why is he working bad? I watched the work and I thought he wasn't impressive. However, that situation parlayed with the fact that he's been out for all this time. He's the type of horse I'm going to want to beat. I want to try to beat More Spirit there. He's going to be overbet off of his Met Mile win. He's going to be overbet because of Baffert. The three horses that kind of catch my attention just looking down at it are Sharp Azteca, Practical Joke, and Cupid. I think those horses are all interesting. I know that our friend Scott Calder got mad at me for calling Cupid second tier, but I think he's one that could get involved here. And then a horse that I've been trying to beat all year since the Commonwealth at Keeneland, and I successfully have done that, 4 times, but it's all been very close. And then he paid me back in the ACAC is Awesome Slew for the Cassies. I think that horse it could be a little bit sneaky at a 2-turn mile, finishing with some speed horses kind of involved and keeping the thing a little bit sharp. Obviously, no pun intended there with Sharp Azteca. I think they could run a little bit there. So I think Awesome Slew is another one that could be a little bit interesting. But those are the ones that have kind of caught my attention at first glance. I noticed Midnight Storm is a possibility. I will never bet him again in a dirt race, especially a grade 1 of this caliber. So that's the first glance.
Pretty good lay of the land. Just when I thought you were going to have to turn the silver wig back in, you mentioned Cupid. I think the last time you opposed Baffert on a day, what did he win for?
Yeah, like I said, I can make it rain in Del Mar. I can make it rain at Santa Anita. I can do lots of things with my attendance or comments. So we'll see what happens. But no, I'm just not convinced on More Spirit. That's just it for whatever reason. It's just something about the horse that doesn't make me feel confident.
Let's start our conversation about the distaff with a quick discussion of Abel Tasman. What are you hearing about her? What are you seeing about her? Is she going to show up in the spot?
I haven't heard. I don't know if you're hinting to something. I hadn't heard anything, so I just assumed she was. I think she's interesting. I'm curious, and I don't know if this decision's been made. But never mind. Mike was never on Paradise Woods for whatever reason. I thought he was. I was confused there.
Flavian Pratt.
Yeah, of course. Maybe Mike did ride her at one point or never. No, I guess it was always Pratt. I think that Abel Tasman has some things she needs to get figured out with this kind of break slowish, middle move-ish thing. From things I've heard, like Mike says she just like wants to go and he doesn't want to fight her out of that. So hopefully she can break that habit. Or maybe we talked about when Abel Tasman moved to Baffert, we were interested what was going to happen because her running style didn't typically fit his training style, which is kind of that forward type of horse. And so maybe that's what happened. Maybe that's what's been going on. Maybe that her training has made her a little bit sharper. She breaks a little bit slow, and then she wants to do that sharpness thing that she's been learning. So maybe they'll just let her roll, get her involved in the race a little bit earlier, kind of get a little bit more of that Baffert, Todd Pletcher, sit third or fourth strip rather than that kind of from way out of it situation. So I'll be interested in playing her in that spot. I think that she could definitely run well there. And then Stellar Wind is one who – one of the themes and one of the things I'm going to have to overcome in this entire Breeders' Cup is I feel like there's going to be some results that are going to be a little bit kooky because of the surface. And I'm not a big – I'm actually turning into a something was wrong with arrogant guy rather than he didn't like the surface. I think maybe something wasn't right. That's why Baffert keeps focusing on, putting weight back on him. We'll get to that when we get to it. But I think that surface is going to throw us some weird results because some horses aren't going to like it. Stellar Wind is one who has run well on the surface, did win a race there in a race that was completely against her from a pace standpoint. And so right now, if I was forced to pick a horse, it would be Stellar Wind. And I think that she's going to be one that's going to be dangerous.
For sure. Abel Tasman versus Elate. Heads up. I'll tip my hand here. One of the reasons why I asked that question about Abel Tasman was she's just so weak in the betting. It made me wonder if there was a question about her participation. Right now, seeing Stellar Wind at 2, Forever Unbridled at 5, Elate at 5, Abel Tasman back at 10. I definitely get the Elate thing. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it. And she's the type of horse that I'll use. I feel like no matter what happens, she's going to be a B horse for me in like a multi situation. I just don't ever find myself warming to her enough to play her as an A. I just think that she'll be kind of like the B type for me. The weirdest thing, the hardest horse to handicap in here is Forever Unbridled. She ran on the 26th of August, where she beat Songbird that day, off of what was like a 70-day layoff. Now she's coming in.
Her usual.
Yeah, her usual. Now she's going to be coming in off of another 70-day layoff. And she hasn't really missed a work. She was back on the tab September 16th, and then September 25th, then October 2nd, 10th, and 18th. And her last 3 works were 6 furlong works at Churchill. So it doesn't seem like there's anything going wrong. It just seems like this is kind of the way that they were going to handle her. So
I think fairly early on they decided she was sort of the stereotypical ouchie unbridled song, and this is the way you have to train her to get the best out of her. She's one that, not really based on anything other than the uncertainty of it. That question you asked about will she like Del Mar pops into my head with Forever Unbridled.
For sure, absolutely, and you never really know. I mean, it can be kind of a closer sweeping track, so it doesn't. I know that sounds weird, but it can do that from time to time. I think the interesting horse that we hadn't talked about yet is Paradise Woods. She's never won at 1 1/8, and in fact, 1 1/8 race is her worst race. This will be at 1 1/8. But with my new kind of pace theories, viewing the world in that we talk about that jockey's dilemma. One of our listeners.
Term. Yeah. Oh, who came up with that? We got to give credit for that.
Gene Menez, who actually lives here in Austin. And,
very cool.
Yeah. So he worked for Sports Illustrated. Now he's for the Austin Monthly. We met when I did that silly picture where that horse was looking at my laptop. So
hero pose.
Anyways, it's the jockey dilemma, and I think that Paradise Woods is the type that could go like 47 to the half at 1 1/8, get them all off the bridle and kind of stay on a little bit. I wouldn't want her going 49 to the half, but she's kind of an interesting one going 1 1/8 in a situation where she doesn't have Paco on a kamikaze trip outside of her like she did in the Kentucky Oaks.
Paco for president. I don't know that it was the 1 1/8 that day so much as it was the pace and the muddy Churchill surface. Let's pause, though, before I ask you another Paradise Woods question. For those who don't know, explain the jockey's dilemma.
Yeah, the jockey's dilemma. We've been trying to think of a name for it, but essentially it's the idea of going too fast and too slow and finding that moment where if you have a speed horse saving something and not having to get off of your horse and look at your trainer and your owner and then be mad at you for going 46-4, but also not going 49-4 and allowing the closers and the stamina types into the race and taking your horse's biggest weapon off the table. And finding that little moment. And the two examples as of late, the recent examples that we've had would be Diversify in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, who I think Jose Ortiz nailed it. Was it Jose? Why am I saying Jose? I think it was Jose. I feel silly now if it wasn't. But
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, okay. So anyways, whoever it was who rode Diversify, going 47 and whatever, and just right there, if he would have gone a little bit slower or a little bit faster, I think Keen Ice would have beat him. Conversely, we had the negative effect with Hawkbill, who went 52 to the half or 51 to the half as a lone speed horse and allowed all those closers into the race and then still finished on great, but unfortunately didn't gap himself away from the field enough. And so
didn't have the speed really to me in the lane. Others have disagreed with that, but Erad rode Diversified.
Erad. It was.
But yeah, the idea is that you want to go fast enough to give yourself the best chance to take advantage of your weapon without going too fast. And to make it much more complicated, most people in the industry, they won't, if you're the speed horse and you go too slow, you don't get criticism the same way you do when you go too fast. And so we always say we'd rather err on the side of going too fast, but it's hard to do that because you'll come in for a lot more criticism. And even I, who's saying that I say that all the time, and then I still like intuitively get a little like annoyed about the ride on Grand Jeté, even though you can argue strategically with the way that I always talk about pace that was a perfectly acceptable ride. Even I still have kind of like a visceral negative reaction there. All right, one more thing on Paradise Woods. The fact that, and if we don't get through all these races, JK, whatever, we'll pick it up again. We've got, lots of Del Mar, lots of Breeders' Cup opportunities to talk about between now and the big day. But does it bother you? Wasn't the really bad race at Del Mar?
Yeah, but I think it was a comeback race. There was a lot of reasons.
Bad start too.
But it does bother me. Yeah. But it was a kind of a, yeah, she was bet off the board and she was poor that day, but it was a comeback race. And it is Papa Mandela, who isn't known for cranking them up and sending them out there, balls to the wall, first start off of a long layoff.
You don't think she's a candidate to be an anti-horse for course as much as that she had other excuses that day?
Oh, no, she's absolutely a candidate for it. Okay. But I also think that but here's the thing though, is I think you'll get a price to find out. I mean, what has she got to be 10-1, doesn't she, on the day?
Yeah, I would think so. Let me take a quick look now what she is. I mean, you'd figure the bloom is off the rose at this point from the Hypey Day. We better 14-1 right now. All right, let's move on to Saturday and the juvenile fillies. Moonshine Memory is going to be your favorite in here. How much do you like her?
Yeah, I do like her. I like her quite a bit. I think that she definitely could be the kind of the star of this group. She's the one who just kind of kept it moving, kept it going in the right direction, and so I'd be interested in her for sure. And that's kind of the only one that gets me really rolling. I'm separation of powers. I'm not mad at her, but I'm not like excited to bet her. I don't really want to bet Lady Ivanka on what was a setup that day and kind of that horse that kind of fell into her lap.
What about Heavenly Love, the Alcibiades winner?
Yeah, no, I think that she's live too for sure. That race was pretty good, and I know that I've heard some really smart guys have strong opinions about her, and so I think that she's definitely one that could kind of jump into the scene. There's nothing that just gets me just going in this race. This is going to be one of those probably stay alive races. I don't have a strong opinion about any of these horses. It's going to be a workout situation, get them all on the same page, a little bit of a pace situation, and I would imagine I'd be using at least 4 A horses in whatever multi-race situation that I can get myself into with this race.
The turf sprint looks, looking at the advanced betting, like there's well, depending on who shows up from Europe, of course, but it sure sounds like Marcia, who beat Lady Aurelia in the Nunthorpe, will be participating and potentially at a multiple of Lady Aurelia's price. I feel like on form, if turf sprints weren't the chaotic races that they tend to be, just on form, Lady Aurelia should be odds on in here against this group, in my opinion. But it's a hard race to bet that way because we know how chaotic these races can be. How much do you like Lady Aurelia? Who do you like from the USA contingent?
Yeah, as a time form guy, I mean, you have to love Lady Aurelia with the 137 and the 134 last time. And yes, Marcia did beat her on good ground. But if you go back to the firm ground, Lady Aurelia kind of handled Marcia a little bit. And you also look at Marcia and her last three races have been on soft, good, and yielding. I mean, I've been known to do some really crazy things with what I can do with the weather, but I don't think it's going to be soft or yielding. And also, I'm
not
better
retire if you make it rain for the Breeders' Cup at Del Mar. You may be sequestered in Austin for 18 months.
And I'm not 100% sure about Chantilly, York, and Goodwood, but I believe all of those 5 furlongs are on straights. Is that true?
Yes. You don't see a lot of 5 furlong around a bend over there at all.
Right. So Lady Aurelia is one that has run around turns
from the race.
She can handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she learned how to run around a bend. When she was broke as a young horse, it happened around a bend. When she trained as a young horse, it happened around a bend. So I don't have any problems with her doing that. The only horses I'm really interested in here, if I could bet right now, I'd bet a Lady Aurelia Exacto with Hoagie and Disco Partner underneath. Obviously, Marcia's the type of horse that can definitely be involved in that. But I want to try to get out on all the things we talked about, a firm surface and running around a bend. But I think Lady Aurelia is going to be tough in here. 137, 134. Those are elite numbers, and they've been playing it. They've been pointing to this race, and I think she'll run well.
World class stuff. Disco Partner, is the 5 going to be too sharp for him?
Yeah, we talked about this before. I mean, he's run 5.5 twice, and both of those races were pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not 130 time form figure good, but he's one that I think can get a piece when it's kind of cooking in front of him. He's got a little bit of a bottom to him with the ability to go 6, 6.5, 7, and even perform at a mile. I think that he'll come running late. Like I said, I don't find a scenario in which he wins the race, but I think he's the perfect type that can pick up the other speed horses who are likely to be gutted by Lady Aurelia.
Long on values listed in the betting, not in the Craig PPs on Time Form US. I'll just throw out there that he'd be one of those horses that, were he to appear, I would have to have at least a C or a few dollar win saver, just pure suicide insurance, just because I have such a long history with the horse. I couldn't accept him winning a Breeders' Cup turf sprint and getting nothing.
But Tash is not coming, that horse?
He's in the betting. I wouldn't have thought so. Does Craig have him in the PPs?
No, I don't see him either, but I just love the fact that I heard that they spray painted his horseshoes gold for his last race.
Yes.
And that's pretty impressive.
Maybe they should do that with Bolt Doro.
They should. Someone should get – Puma should be sponsoring. I know Puma sponsors the Jamaican track team and Usain Bolt. They need to get those two together before Boldoro wins the juvenile, which I guess I'm teasing.
That idea could actually happen. I mean, why not? We've seen weird sponsorships before. Somebody should get on that who's in that business. Let's move on to the Filly and Mare Sprint, JK. Lots of obviously familiar names in here. Seems like, looking at the betting, Unique Bella is going to take a whole lot of money. Can you see her stepping up and getting it done against this group?
Her last figure just didn't come back when I thought it was going to come back. I know I talked about it before the race, and when I was joking with the guys in the group text about how she's going to be bet and how I think she actually could probably get it done. I'm starting to become a little bit less, starting to feel a little bit less about that. I don't know for sure if this is true. I heard it, and I heard it through. When I say I heard it, I heard that Chad Brown said it on Vic. So, if you want to listen back to that to double check me. But I heard he said that Karina Mia had a quarter crack going into her last race. That makes me feel a lot better about the fact that I wanted to bet her, but I was disappointed how she ran that day. If that happens to be the case, and one of the things I like to do is go back through Bick's archives and listen to the trainers that have horses in the Breeders' Cup. If I can find time to do it, and that's definitely one I want to listen to, because she could get upgraded for me if that happens to be the case.
Karina Mia you're talking about.
Karina Mia, absolutely. A horse that I didn't see when I was kind of poking it at the fellas in the group text about Unique Bella was Fapian for Bob Baffert. She's always been one that's been a little bit interesting, has had success going 7. She's a West Coast horse. Bioma Corporation, ironically enough, the same people that own Dre Fong. She's the type of horse that could get a little bit loose on him here and be a problem. So she's one that kind of caught my attention at first glance. The rest of them I've kind of expressed, I'm not crazy about. Curlin's Approval, Finley's Lucky Charm, sure. But I'm going to try to find something a little bit more creative in this spot. And I think Karina Mia, Fapian are the leaders in the clubhouse for that creativity.
Interesting. Fapian not even listed in the betting on Odds Checker. Karina Mia 20-1. You mentioned Steve Bick's At the Races show, which you can access on SiriusXM. But probably the easiest thing to do is go to stevebick.com. You can listen live on there. You can download every episode. You can get it received to your iPhone as a podcast, just like you can with the DRF Players podcast and Matt Bernier show and Out of the Gate. I highly recommend it too. Steve it's just incredible. His standing in the industry, the guests he gets, and the way that people speak to him. You get a tremendous level of honesty from some of the guests that he's been having on for years, and it's just another great perspective. I checked that out along with, of course, all the great reporting on in the Daily Racing Forum and DRF.com. These are great places to get from the horse's mouth, if you will, trainers' inside perspective. I recommend checking out all those sources as you continue to do your Breeders' Cup homework. Let's go on to the 4th race. It is the Filly and Mare Turf. This is another one where we can't really talk about it too much till we know who's coming. You talked about the benefits of Lasix, JK, and that puts my mind right to Rhododendron, a horse for Aidan O'Brien, who I know has had bleeding problems in the past and just seems like one who will be really suited by this. Also, just a macro note on this race, very important to note, the 1 1/8 as opposed to how it's sometimes 1 1/4. If defending champion Queen's Trust were to show up between the cut and distance from last year and just how off form Queen's Trust has been, I picked her on top last year in this race. Wouldn't want her for a penny here. What do you think?
Well, ironically enough, I think a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, Lady Eli will probably be overbet," blah 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 blah. But the truth of the matter is I flipped through here. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm almost to the bottom. I think that Lady Eli's last 4 time form figures are faster than any of these horses has ever run.
That's amazing.
Even the Euros? Yeah. I mean, let me try to get a little bit, at least on like, maybe you need to scroll down and find a deep time. But her last 4, her slowest time is a 1:26, and I don't believe that anyone else has run faster than a 1:26 in their entire life. And she has 4 figures that are 1:26 or higher in her last 4 starts. And as I go through it again, I don't think anyone else has run a 1:26 or higher time form US.
It's interesting. Yeah, the numbers don't quite match up, though, because I'm looking at like top form Europeans, and the numbers are not as fast as Grand Jetés say. It makes me wonder if there's something going on in the scale with the Euros. But I certainly think that's significant, the Lady Eli figure advantage compared to the other USA runners in here.
So, they're numbers, and they can always be wrong. But just for those who are new to time form, what Pete is saying is that the scale could be off, but the scale is intended to not be off. It's intended to be the same.
Apples to apples. We should ask Craig about it. I don't want to get too deep into the methods and whatnot, and I hope I'm not impugning the figures. But I mean, it seems odd to me that Rhododendron wouldn't have run a higher figure than Grand Jeté. So
Rhododendron's highest is 117.
Yeah, that doesn't feel right to me. But okay. Craig knows a lot more than me. I'm not meaning to criticize him. It just makes me wonder if there's something with weight or the methodology or for some reason why that's not meant to be an apples to apples. Hey, maybe it is, and maybe Grand Jeté will finish lengths ahead of Rhododendron. Who knows? But so Lady Eli, your larger point though was Lady Eli is one who will be on all your tickets, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think the 1 1/8 is kind of great for her. She's handled the West Coast racing obviously a few times with her Breeders' Cup win, her Breeders' Cup second last year, and her Gamely win this year. So going west is not something that bothers her. She likes that kind of faster surface. I just think she's just as game as they come. What a cool horse to overcome what she's overcome and to be in a position to do this. And then I believe she'll go to the sales ring the week after. From what I understand, they're gonna sell her as a breeding option. So that can be interesting to keep an eye on as well.
What a great story, and something that will continue to follow to its conclusion. Let's move on to the juvenile. Is this one as simple as Bolt Doro? Sure looks that way when you look at the time form spotlight figures.
We've got 9 minutes left. We'll talk about this as many times as we need to. I think this is the foregone conclusion. This horse is going to absolutely romp, and he's going to be a ton of fun to watch as a 3-year-old moving forward.
All right, there you go. Both Doro fans, Golden Horseshoes, and all get on that. Puma will send you the check, send you the address to send the check for the idea. Race 6 is the mile, another one that's in that category of impossible to say before we know who's going to show up. Interesting. Long on value is listed here, not in the sprint. A lot will depend. We got the big races at Ascot tomorrow. It sounded to me, reading between the lines of quotes, like they were thinking about Ribchester to skip this at this point and head over to Asia instead for fall Group 1 activity there. But it'd be very interesting to see what ends up coming from this for Aidan O'Brien. Churchill being among the possibilities. I think he's got excuses for his last few, but I mean, again, we got to see what he does tomorrow before we make any assessments. Who do you like from the home team?
Well, I guess if I had to pick someone who's going to be a price, now I'm not sure the horse is going to win, but we talked about it earlier, kind of the tourist vibe I'm getting from a horse like Bala Rocks. I thought that horse has been one that has kind of gotten my attention. He's always kind of around there, and especially at a mile. He's run well on firm. He's run well on yielding. I think that he's one that could be interesting there. It's interesting that Divisadero shows up here. He didn't really run all that bad last time in the Shadwell Turf Mile, but that race didn't give me a warm feeling. But if I'm going to be interested in Bala Rocks, I got to be interested in Divisadero underneath. To me, this is one of those European races. I just don't think we have a miler that kind of can get me going like we've had in the past. There's a lot of my fandom horses in here, right, with Yoshida and Divisadero that I have to kind of take into consideration. But I'm going to be looking for a Euro that shows up here, whichever one of those happens to be the best, and we'll go from there.
Sudwaz, I'll just throw him out as one I wanted to get your opinion of after the surprise win last time.
Same idea as what we talked about with Bala Rocks and Divisadero, as well as Heart to Heart. Wasn't crazy about that race, how it all unfolded, how the winner kind of seemingly came from nowhere. Makes me feel like the race wasn't that great.
Yeah, and he'll be shorter than those others, too, you'd think, significantly, just looking at betting now. Sudwaz, 12-1, Bala Rocks, 25-1, and the great Yoshida, 16-1.
Regardless what happens tomorrow, we talked about it after Woodbine. Lancaster Bomber was one that caught my attention, one that I was interested in. I know that he's entered to run tomorrow, I believe, when I looked at the odds just to double check. So obviously there'll be a decision that needs to be made after that. He typically runs with 49 days, 45 days, 43 days, 24 days, 21 days, 42 days. This seems like it might be a little bit of a tight comeback for him. He came back in 17 days when he was a 2-year-old and didn't run so well. So I trust Aidan O'Brien if he puts him on the plane, but we'll see what happens with Lancaster Bomber.
Other Euros to look at, Barney Roy. If he were to come over, he's going the 10 furlongs in the Champion Stakes, I believe, tomorrow. But I think he's more of a miler, could be very interesting should he show up. And Winter's still listed in the betting. If only for the Game of Thrones jokes, we need to get Winter over here.
Yeah, winter is coming? ?
All right, Breeders' Cup Sprint. Drefong going to be heavy at the top of the markets here, and with good reason. Is this one where you're looking to narrow in, or one where you feel like you might want to spread around a bit?
I think I'm going to spread around a little bit. I've heard El Deal has an issue. Confirm that on DRF.com if you want. I think I don't think he'll be showing up, which is a pace problem. I made a pace problem, but a pace influencer. In the past, I would fall for horses like Stallwalking Dude and Whitmore, who I think are going to get pace to run at and close, but they never do when they come out west. So I'm not going to do that this time. Imperial Hint, if he shows up, has run some gaudy numbers in the past. So I think he's one that could be a little bit interesting. I watched the Talkaful workout. He started off like a maniac, and then he kind of relaxed. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. And I cannot find a story about Ransom the Moon to hear a quote about why he ran as poorly as he did. I'll be keeping an eye on him. I still would like to get involved with Ransom the Moon.
He's not beating us. I mean, at this point, we've been talking about him for the race for months.
But I just need to know what happened. He was so bad.
But don't you think that's the kind of situation where you need to know what happened to dial in and make him some big A, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, he's got to be an include, doesn't he?
Oh, he's an absolute include no matter what, for sanity purposes only. I think as horse players, sometimes you have to do things to keep your sanity.
I think we're in good shape here. 2 minutes each on these last two races when we've talked about them a lot already, and we'll be talking about them more. The turf. We have Ulysses as the likely favorite. I mean, I ID'd him as the horse I wanted for this race as they crossed the wire last year, and this year's done nothing to get me off of that. I'm Team Ulysses. Highland Reel, obviously, extreme threat as well. I don't know that I need much more than those two, Jonathan.
Yeah, just some thoughts. We talked about it before. I think Oscar Performance can be interesting in that kind of that world of the jockey's dilemma, where he's going to be on the probably the firmest course he's been on, and a course that I think he's always wanted to. We know that Oscar Performance doesn't like it soft, and so I'd like to see him in that opportunity, kind of on the front end to let run a little bit. And yeah, I mean, obviously what happens with Highland Reel and Ulysses is going to make a big difference in the betting here and a big difference in what I decide to bet here. Beach Patrol's last race was impressive. When I talked about watching workouts, I had a trip. We kind of gave a trip a little bit to Fanciful Angel it was all over the place, rank as ever the entire time. And then I saw a workout with Fanciful Angel and Beach Patrol, and he did the same thing. So I don't see why he's going to come out west in front of a huge crowd in a $5 million or $3 million race, or $4 million race, and decide to relax. So he's one that seems like he might have some mental issues to work through. So Highland Reel and Ulysses if they show up, but I'm not going to let Oscar Performance beat me.
That's interesting. I don't mind him for a penny either because I think he'll be a big number. I think the last race was better than it looked. Remember, the course is listed as firm, but Jose Ortiz, we heard that interview as part of the NYRA coverage, talking about how much cut there really was in the ground. Didn't really run that bad. I mean, it's a tough spot with Beach Patrol in there, but the idea that he could be best of speed and hang around for a piece is much more likely to me than him actually beating those good closers. But I agree. I don't want to get knocked out of anything. He'll be in there for at least a penny when it comes to the horizontal bets. And now let's talk about the Classic. Very simple first question. Is this a two-horse race?
I think it is on top. Yeah, I think it's a two-horse race. I think Arrogate or Gunrunner get the job done. We've talked about it before. I think Gunrunner needs to be considered that the performances that people are falling in love with him on were at 1 1/8 in races where he was 1-5 and 3-5. And 2-5. His last 3 races were 1 1/8 where no one was supposed to beat him. And he was 6 clear, 3 clear, and 5 clear when they turned for home.
Well, look, so he hasn't on the clock. I mean, he raced.
Fair, no, I know, and I'm big about that. I'm big about I don't care who they beat. I care how fast they run,
especially on dirt.
Right, but the point that can't be forgotten is those were at 1 1/8. Now he's running 1 1/4, where Arrogate, I've heard people say, it could potentially one of the best 1 1/4 horses they've ever seen. That's kind of his true distance. His time form figures at 1 1/4 are 137, 137, and 134. Those were his time form figures prior to his kind of flop in the Pacific Classic. Gunrunner's 1 1/4 race was 130, where Arrogate beat him after spotting him all that ground. And then in the Kentucky Derby at 121, when he was a 3-year-old, so he won't. I'm sorry, at 121 in the Travers, he was a 3-year-old. Won't hold that against him. So I am starting to believe that Arrogate was not right this summer, and not like in danger of career-ending injury, right? Because obviously Baffert and Juddmonte wouldn't run him in those situations, but something wasn't right about him. He's focusing on putting weight back on him. He's not, blitzing him every morning. He's just kind of letting him go around there and wants to put weight back on him. And I'm going to see how it progresses, but I think I'm going to get back on board the Arrogate situation. My creative part of this race is that Travis Stone is I'm sure he got it from someone else, but he's the one closest to me that talks about kind of reversing those trifectas where, we're all interested in, putting people on top in trifectas and then putting likely seconds and likely thirds. He's gotten this reverse situation where he'll put the likely thirds and then reverse it the other way. And I think that Keen Ice and Muptahij are horses that if you put those two horses in third place and then worked backwards, it's one that you could probably come up with something. And I would even throw out Gunnevera based on the race that he ran in the Travers. He's definitely one to keep an eye on. He'll be a little bit forgotten based on his connections and working at Gulfstream Park West.
So almost like two runners by a bunch by those two runners is kind of what you're describing for a potential early try approach in the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yeah, I mean, I love a situation where you're arrogant gun runner with, arrogant, collected, diversified gun runner, West Coast with Gunnevera, Keen Ice, Muptahij. You know what I mean? One of those situations like that. Good luck trying to figure out what the math is on that. That's when you got to type in your ADW and let them tell you how much it costs. But,
I tell you,
something like that.
For a sleeper to get a piece in the unlikely event they decide to run him here, Churchill, a little bit interesting to me for like a third and fourth type. Don't see him beating these horses, but gosh, if you could get 50-1 or something over there, maybe a little bit interesting. O'Brien's been known to take these shots with his best middle distance horse in a race like the Classic. It would mean so much to his stud fee. I just think he's a horse who's had kind of some good buried races since the early success he had as a dual Guineas winner. And he's just a horse I'm very interested in general. We'll see how he makes out tomorrow at a price against some pretty good competition in the likes of Ribchester at Royal Ascot. I know I'll be up early watching. JK, will you?
Oh yeah, I'll be up. I was excited looking at it this morning, so I'll definitely take a look.
All right, we are over time here, so let's cut it. But thank you very much for all your insights, JK. Thanks, everybody, to listening. Please go to Spreaker.com, subscribe to the podcast, get an email whenever we go live, and go to iTunes, leave us a review, our favorite review, a random review, however we're going to do it. Going to win a copy of the new book, Betting with an Edge, by Mike Maloney, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of that. That's all the time we have. We will be back on Tuesday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. Yes, sir.
Whoa.
You got a final thought for us, JK?
Pictures coming soon.
May you win all your photos.